Yo, what's up? Welcome to Kinda Funny Games Daily for Monday, May 2nd, 2022. I'm one of your hosts, Blessing Adeoye Jr. Joining me is the LaCroix Poppy himself, aka my fellow Forbes 30 under 30, aka Tim fucking Gettys.
Let Tim host. Bless. What a Monday. Mondays are usually a big gaming news day, but it's rare we get one like this. We have so much to get into. Oh, this is about to be insane.
Tim, before I even get into it, show your full shirt. I think I've seen this shirt before, but I want to be reminded. Okay, this is for the Gordo Taqueria.
Yeah.
Is this still...
SF motherfuckers know what's up.
I've not been to Gordo. Is it still open? Was that one of the ones that closed during the pandemic?
Oh, no. Gordo's still open. They'll always be open.
Gotcha. I need you to take me to Gordo someday because I've not been to Gordo. And I feel like I've heard a lot about it.
Yeah.
All right. Tim, you know what we should do right now? Talk about some video game news because there's a lot to talk about, Tim. Today's stories include Square Enix sells its Western studios, Warner Brothers could sell its studios, and more because this is Kinda Funny Games Daily. Each and every weekday at 10 a.m. live right here on twitch.tv/kindafunnygames. We run you through the nerdy news you need to know about. If you're watching live, you can correct us when we get stuff wrong by going to kindafunny.com/you're wrong. If you don't want to watch live, you can watch later on youtube.com/kindafunnygames, roosterteeth.com, or you can listen later on podcast services around the globe by searching for Kinda Funny Games Daily. Remember, you can use Epic Creator Code Kinda Funny on all Epic Store and Epic in-game purchases like Rocket League and Fortnite to help support the channel. To be part of the show, to patreon.com/kindafunnygames, where bronze members or above get to write in, and silver members or above get the show ad-free with the exclusive daily post show. Housekeeping for you, Eid Mubarak to all those who are celebrating. And then in case you missed it, there's a new Kinda Funny Xcast that's up right now, breaking down what to expect from Xbox's game showcase coming up in June. That one features the one and only Benji Sales, and that is up right now on youtube.com/kindafunnygames and on podcast services around the globe. Thank you to our Patreon producers, Anonymous and Fargo Brady. Today we're brought to you by ExpressVPN, Chime, and Babbel, but we'll babble on about that later. For now, let's begin with what is, and forever will be, the Roper Report. It's time for some news. We have 4 stories today.
A baker's dozen.
Starting with our number one. Tim, Embracer Group is acquiring Eidos, Crystal Dynamics, and Square Enix Montreal. I'm pulling from Adam Bankhurst at IGN, and there are many parts of the story and many questions that y'all wrote in with, and so thank you very much for that, and we'll get to those questions in a bit. But let's start off with very top level. Again, this is Adam Bankhurst at IGN. Embracer Group has entered into an agreement to acquire Crystal Dynamics, Eidos Montreal, Square Enix Montreal, and a catalog of IPs including Tomb Raider, Deus Ex, Thief, Legacy of Kain, and more than 50 back catalog games from Square Enix Holdings for $300 million. Embracer Group shared the news in a press release saying this acquisition includes roughly 1,100 employees across 3 studios and 8 global locations. The deal, if it goes through, is expected to close during Q2 of Embracer Group's financial year 2022/2023. Quote, "We are thrilled to welcome these studios into the Embracer Group. We recognize the fantastic IP, world-class creative talent, and track record of excellence that has been demonstrated time and again over the past decades. It has been a great pleasure meeting the leadership teams and discussing future plans for how they can realize their ambitions and become a great part of Embracer," says Lars Wingfors, co-founder and group CEO, Embracer Group. Tim, I'm going to stop there because I want the Tim Gettys take on what is happening here.
I mean, it's absolutely insane. You know, someone tweeted at us earlier today saying, "Do you smell that? It is acquisition season." And this is a season that I do not think is going to end anytime soon. It is just beginning. We're seeing a lot of these shakeups. This is one that in particular I didn't expect and I didn't see coming from a lot of different perspectives. I think the main one being 300 million is a much lower number than the numbers we've been seeing that have a B in front of that second word for the last couple, even with Bungie, right? A singular developer in the billions. So for 300 million, getting all of these extremely talented developers, including Crystal Dynamics and Eidos, it's like, come on. Like, they have proven time and time again that they got the goods when it comes to making games. They also, there's been some mistakes in things like Avengers that obviously we don't even need to get into. We all understand that it's not pure hit factories over there, but there's a lot of factors that go into that decision-making from above that leads down to the games becoming what they are, a bit more money grabby. But when you look at things like the Tomb Raider franchise, like they made great games. Then you look at like the sales of them and the expectations put on them by Square and all that, and it starts to add up a little bit more. But that 300 million number to me tells a story, and that story is they were trying to get rid of them for another reason. I think that this is very much a sign of what's to come for Square Enix themselves. They are trimming the fat. They are making sure that they are valuable to be sold off to somebody else.
Oh, so you think that's the alternative? Okay, well, I'm going to get into the next news story real quick, right? Because this involves Square Enix kind of explaining why they're selling, and then I have a question that piggybacks off of what you just said, because I think that is a very interesting thought right there. Let's hop into another story from Adam Bankhurst at IGN. Square Enix has shared some of its reasoning behind the decision to sell Crystal Dynamics, Eidos Montreal, and Square Enix Montreal to Embracer Group, saying the transaction will allow the company to invest more in the blockchain, AI, and the cloud. Square Enix revealed the purpose of the transaction in its execution of share transfer agreement, which changed its subsidiaries document, saying it'll assist the company in, quote, adapting to the changes underway in the global business environment by establishing a more efficient allocation of resources, which will enhance corporate value by accelerating growth in the company's core businesses in the digital entertainment domain. In addition, the transaction enables the launch of new businesses by moving forward with the investments in fields including blockchain, AI, and the cloud, says Square Enix. This news follows Square Enix president Yosuke Matsuda's New Year's Day 2022 letter that was centered on the company's growing focus on NFTs, blockchain games, and the metaverse. Matsuda also reiterated his interest in blockchain in April 2022. Moving forward, Square Enix's, quote, development function will comprise its studios in Japan, Square Enix External Studios, and Square Enix Collective. The company's overseas studios will continue to publish franchises such as Just Cause, Outriders, and Life is Strange, end quote. And so that is the Square Enix explanation of what's going on here. Hey, we want to sell these studios so that we can build more cash and make more room to focus in on blockchain, AI, in the cloud. Now, Tim, you're talking about the possibility of them selling so that they can get that weight off, so that they can actually sell Square Enix itself to maybe a bigger publisher. I got a question here.
Real quick, can I pop in here real quick? Just because I want to address something that you were just talking about here. Like the blockchain stuff to me just feeds what I'm saying even more, because not only is this them shedding things that cost them a lot of money and are not making as much money as they needed to, they are now able to invest in things that are going to make them a lot of money quickly, potentially, to be even more valuable to sell at a higher price or whatever that is. Continue.
Tim. Ryan Paola Higgins writes in and says, hey, Kinda Funny Games Daily. Today, Embracer Group bought 3 of Square Enix's studios based in the West. This pretty much makes Square Enix a Japanese company again. Sony have done many exclusivity deals with the Japanese side of Square Enix over the years, and rumors there have been floating around of a big Sony purchase. We know the difficulty when buying a Japanese company, but do you think Sony will buy the rest of Square Enix now that it doesn't have the Western studios? Take care and stay safe, Ryan Paola Higgins. And Tim, I can even explain this out. Who do you think could buy Square Enix? You think PlayStation's going to buy Square Enix?
Yeah, Ryan nailed it. I mean, there's been rumors of that, but I think specifically now, when you think about where we're at, why would Square be kind of trimming everything if it's trying to sell to somebody? They're going to try to sell to one of the big dogs. And I think Microsoft's simply out of the running, not because of interest, but because of their situation with Activision. Them putting down that gauntlet of like, yo, we are doing this. This is a big thing. All eyes are on them. They got all the government entities and shit looking at every single thing they're doing. They're not going to be able to just be out there buying people of the size of Square Enix. So I think that this is, and also not even just that, culture-wise, partnership-wise, there's so much history between Square and PlayStation. Even just look at the lineup of the last couple of years on the PS4 and now with PS5 with Final Fantasy VII Remake, Final Fantasy 16. They're PlayStation exclusives, right? Is Forspoken exclusive or not?
Yes. Forspoken is PC and PS5, yeah.
So there we go, right? It's like the story kind of writes itself. There is the argument to be made of like, well, if they're exclusive anyways, why would you need to purchase it? And it's like, well, it's acquisition season. That's kind of the trend going around right now, and everyone is kind of, there is this panic of gobble everyone up, or who are we going to get gobbled by, right? And I think when we look at the news of the last couple weeks with like Ubisoft and them kind of like seemingly also preparing for a potential buy, right? And we know WB, we're going to talk about that in a little bit. Like everyone kind of has a different thing to offer. And it's interesting to look at Square right now with their Japanese offerings when it comes to like the Final Fantasy, specifically with things like Final Fantasy 14 making as much money as it is, right? They have a core business here that is working, but we also need to look at a lot of the Square Enix games that are coming out that are not hitting. And it's like they're looking at all these the Western devs as like the games being good quality, whatever, but not making the money they want. But then they're putting games out like The Blind Man or whatever.
Yeah, The Quiet Man.
Quiet Man, yeah.
It's very fascinating to look at, and I really love the lens in which you're looking at it through, because for me, you're answering a lot of questions that I had. Because for me, with this news story came a lot of questions of like, is this undervaluing, right? Like I look at $300 million, and that is $300 million for 1,100 employees, right? 3 studios, Crystal Dynamics, a talented studio, Eidos Montreal, a talented studio, right? Like just coming off of Guardians of the Galaxy. Square Enix, is it Montreal? Square Enix Montreal, yeah, like a talented mobile studio. Those are some talented studios, right? Then look at the IP being Tomb Raider, one of the most like storied franchises that they have, right? You're looking at Deus Ex, you're looking at Thief, you're looking at Legacy of Kain, and the list goes on and on. $300 million seems so small for that. Do you feel like they're undervaluing?
It's complicated, right? Because like where is the value for it? 300 million for the talent there, I think it is undervaluing for what we'd expect, especially because it comes with so many iconic IP. But at the end of the day, the proof is in the pudding, and these games, despite their quality, decisions have been made that they are not bringing in the money necessary. So that to me is the most interesting part, where we look at the Embracer Group being the ones to purchase them. That is the most bummer news of all of this to me, because right now it seems like that is a place that games and IP and teams go to die. It is not necessarily something that is thriving, and we're seeing like a cadence of game releases like they don't seem like a normal one of the publishers, like a Ubisoft or an EA, where it's like, okay, cool, like we understand exactly what they're doing. Kind of seems a little bit piecemeal. Kind of seems like there's less strategy across their entire situation, and it seems more just kind of like playing with what they got and buying more things, as opposed to if we did see a purchase from a Sony or a Microsoft, where I think that it'd be a little bit more in line with a plan and a strategy that makes a little bit more sense to us. But then you got to look at the fact that there's the IP that they had to license, right? We're talking about Avengers, we're talking about Guardians being 2, I think, of the bigger examples of where this starts to make a little bit more sense. Like that is where licensing deals come into play, where it costs money to be able to do that. And that hurts the profit and revenue that you can make from those titles, right? So when we look at the Tomb Raider side of things, it's like they made those decisions to partner with Xbox early, which I think kneecapped Tomb Raider reboot's success as a franchise in this generation, because it kind of limited things to the wrong box, essentially, back when Rise of the Tomb Raider first came out, right? That was a game that was like supposed to be a big win for Xbox, but really it was the type of game that the player base was on PlayStation. And that's a perfect example of a game that would have succeeded way more if it was multi-platform, right? Yeah. And I think that because of that, they kind of like sullied the Tomb Raider brand in terms of its money-making capabilities. So they can restart now, and also it makes so much sense now that they announced a new Tomb Raider game in the way that they did. So we all need to keep our eyes out at these random blog posts, or not even blog posts, the tweets that are announcing games, all the shit that feels weird, where it's like, why wouldn't they put this in a presentation? It's like, if you put that out there, chances are they're making some moves to invest things, the chess pieces, all that stuff. So it's acquisition season, baby.
Acquisition season. Tim, you brought up Avengers just a second ago. I want to bring in a question from the 5-star man who wrote into patreon.com/kindafunnygames, just like you can, and says, "Morning, Tim and Bless. I'm sure in the weeds with questions about the Embracer Group acquiring Eidos, Crystal Dynamics, and Square Enix Montreal, but I have what is probably the most important question. What does this mean for the Avengers, if anything at all? If you need to call in famed Avengers apologist Greg Miller, I understand. Thank you for your time and have a great show, the 5-star man." Tim, what is this, the writing on the wall? Is Avengers done?
Yeah. I mean, I think the writing has already been on the wall, but I feel like this is just like even more confirming it. And look, anything can happen, and Embracer Group has a lot of money. So if they wanted to, they could relicense and continue it all up. And like, to some extent, I wouldn't be surprised if we did get another Guardians of the Galaxy game from that team.
That was my bigger question. I think Avengers, the writing has been on the wall for a minute. I think, even if they didn't sell to Embrace Group, I think Avengers will be shut down within like the next year or so. Guardians of the Galaxy is a thing that did have a good first game launch. You would expect that would turn into a franchise. And with how this stuff works, right? You expect that licensing would have been going down on the Square Enix publisher side. So with that then being traded off to Embracer Group, I think there's a chance that you don't see that. I think there's a chance that you do, right? I think the question is, how much value does Embracer Group see in continuing Guardians of the Galaxy versus going, hey, just make another Deus Ex or make another one of these games that we already have in our IP slate?
Well, I think the bigger question there that we're just going to kind of have to wait and see is like, how does Embracer start treating its games? Like, do we end up getting an Embracer press conference during Summer Game Fest? Not this year, but like eventually, where it is kind of looked to as we used to look at an EA Play or a Ubisoft E3 press conference, where it's like, oh, cool, they do have all these different teams working on games and they're trying to treat it as if they are one group? Or are they going to continue to kind of just function behind the scenes and just own a bunch of stuff and put out a bunch of ports, and then every once in a while there is a bit more prestige titles, but we just haven't seen too many big examples of that, right? But now they have Borderlands. Like, it's not like there was zero evidence in the past of bigger like franchises, AAA franchises being released by them, but we'll have to see where it goes from here with the licensing side of it. But they have licenses to so many things. They have SpongeBob. They have like all of like stuff that you wouldn't necessarily think about or expect. But on this side, it has to make sense. And I think that this isn't evidence that they're never going to do a Marvel project again, but I don't think that it's like a guarantee. I think that it's less likely than likely.
So then I want to bring in another question, right? We're talking about summer showcases, right? Dean Labarca writes in and says, "Morning, Blessing and Tim. I woke up to the Square Enix news this morning, and while I'm sure there are a lot of questions to be asked, my mind jumps to Square Enix Presents. While all of the E3 style showcases are up in the air at the moment for obvious other reasons, I'm now even more curious about what we'll see from Square this summer. Do you think they can support an entire Square Enix Presents without their Western devs? Guardians was such a huge part of the show last year. Personally, I think any major games would just get passed to PlayStation for their show. Hope you all have a great start to the week." Tim, do we see a Square Enix Presents this year?
Look, I mean, here's the thing. Do we? Probably. Do we need to? No. Are all the big announcements going to be in PlayStation's event? Yes. That's what I think is going to happen. Square infamously does these things no matter what. No matter if they have content to show or don't, they're going to show a Dragon Warrior, Dragon Quest trailer for a game that came out 15 years ago, 5 years ago, 2 years ago. It doesn't matter. They're going to play it with that goddamn theme song on repeat, and it's going to be the most awkward thing in the fucking world. They just don't give a fuck. So I imagine that they're going to do that. I think that when you look at the Square Enix Presents showcases the last couple of years, they're at their most bizarre when it is, here's one of the Western ones, and now here's one of the Japanese ones back to back. And it's just like, it seems like nobody had any actual production background period coming up with the run of show, and it just almost seems random what they're doing. At least now there's a little bit more consistency in brand and tone and voice of the games that they're going to show. But having said that, I think that all the exciting things, mainly the Final Fantasy stuff and the Kingdom Hearts stuff and that level of game, that going forward, I imagine it's going to be more state of play focused, which it has been already when we look at them for the last couple of years.
Yeah, and that's my thing is, I feel like when it comes to do we have a presentation, do we not have a presentation, it comes down to how much do we have to show. And I think that puts them in a very interesting place this year, where last year they did have Guardians that had a relatively big presence at that showcase, right? And the other game that had a big presence, or the other games I should say, were Babylon's Fall and then also Stranger of Paradise. I feel like now going into this next year, like, of course they could have new games to announce, they could have more stuff. Square Enix is such an unpredictable, weird publisher in that way, where they can announce the most random ass game and give it a big spot. But I would be surprised. I think running this close to it, having this sale go down right now, I feel like you would throw those plans out the window unless you're aiming for maybe a late summer type thing where you can, take a second look at what you have and figure out how you want to communicate that. I feel like if the plan was or is next month, I think this shakeup kind of takes a lot of wind out of, hey, what do we have to show? Like right now, I can't sit down and think from just the Japanese side what you show at Square Enix, because I don't think you show
But
a new
bless.
Final Fantasy. I think Final Fantasy 16 is PlayStation, right? Forspoken, I think you show up PlayStation.
What you're missing is what they show at these Square things. It is going to be a bunch of games that we are like, what? Like spin-offs and mobile games and like weird pixel remasters. And that's what they show at these Square Enix Presents things. And every once in a while, there's like a thing in the middle. The other thing to keep in mind is that despite this sale, they still have their publishing like partnership things that they got like with People Can Fly, with like Outriders, and then with Life is Strange and all that. So the Square Enix Presents can just be filled with that. You know, it could be, I'm just throwing this out there, I don't think it's going to happen, but like Life is Strange True Colors DLC or something like that. Like I imagine that any update that is possible to give is going to be at a potential Square Enix Presents, and that's the level of announcements we're going to get.
So then going back to the top of it, how do we feel about this deal? Like, is this, for me, I'm somebody who's a big fan of Deus Ex, right? I'm somebody who wants to continue to see Crystal Dynamics kill it, because I also love Tomb Raider. I like Guardians of the Galaxy, right? Like, I want to see these games continue to thrive and grow and be good games. Do you feel good about this acquisition? Like, do you think they're in good hands? Like, I don't know how to read. You mentioned it before, right? Embracer Group is such a weird company that has like no consistency. You don't take this and look at it as if PlayStation acquired them, you can see the strategy. If Microsoft acquired them, you can see the strategy. They get looped in the Game Pass, right? Like with Embracer Group, there seems to be such a lack of concrete direction, and I can't tell if that is, hey, we're hands off as a publisher and we just let our developers do what they do, which could be a good thing, or if it is the thing of, hey, we're messy, we have so many studios, we don't know how to manage them all, because at this point we're well over 100. Like for you, how do you take this news?
Not well. I like, and I know that when it comes to acquisition talks, everybody has a lot of feelings about it, and you know, it can get scary. The word monopoly gets thrown around a lot, and there's a lot of like bad sides to this. But at the end of the day, me personally, as a gamer that likes high quality video games of a certain type, I would much rather Crystal Dynamics go with either Microsoft or PlayStation than the Embracer Group, right? So that to me is my biggest thing. Is I like Crystal Dynamics games. I like Eidos Montreal games. This is not good news to me. I don't think it's the worst news in the world. I don't think that it is going to destroy this and mean that we're never going to get a good Crystal game again. I think that we definitely could. I also don't know that this means we're going to, though. And anytime these acquisitions happen, what does that do to the actual teams, to the people working on the games? A lot of questions up in the air. But the positive side of it is you look at what Square Enix was doing with them, and it wasn't necessarily using their talents to their utmost, right? Especially when you look at things like Avengers. I do think on the flip side, Guardians was incredible. I love Guardians, and I stand by Guardians being an amazing game, period. But for their first swing at a franchise like that, I thought they knocked it out of the park. But you look at it and you're like, what is Embracer going to do with that? There's so many IP that have been dormant for years, the Legacy of Kains and stuff that people are going to be really excited about. But it's like, I just don't know what actually comes from this, and does it push the needle in any demonstrable way? When you look at Embracer, the type of games that they've released, the type of games that they have pushed in the last couple of years, anything that I've been excited about Embracer, I still haven't actually gotten. Where's my Time Splitters? You know what I mean? So it's hard for me to be excited about these things that I like being in their hands, because I really haven't seen any fruits of the labor of anything that potentially could have ever excited me coming out of Embracer so far.
Yeah. I think looking at them in the hands of Square Enix, right, and like kind of what those studios were doing already, it is a very fascinating thing to think about and look at, because I mentioned it, I think, in the last 2 episodes of Kind of Funny Games Daily, that Square Enix is such a mystery to me in terms of just their inconsistency as a publisher, right? Like they'll put out Final Fantasy VII Remake and have it be Kind of Funny's Game of the Year, and then they'll put out Quiet Man, right? And then they'll put out Outriders, it's a very fine game, and then they'll put out Balan Wonderworld, right? And then they'll put out Life is Strange, and it's fucking great. Like there is so much up and down with Square Enix, especially when you look at their Western side and like how that fits in with the rest of Square Enix, because there's a thing that we've talked about for a while, which is for a lot of these games, they've underperformed. Specifically, the Western side of Square Enix has underperformed for them. And that is underperformed in quotes, right? Like these games seem to be popular. These games seem to be doing good for the most part. When you look at Guardians and then you look at Marvel's Avengers, you can kind of see how that very much underperforms. But you go through the list and it is things like, you know, Outriders, I believe, failed to meet expectations, right? Guardians of the Galaxy failed to meet expectations. Even Tomb Raider, 2013, I think 2018 also failed to meet expectations. You go down the list of Hitman, you know, Hitman and IO got sold off or not, didn't even get sold off, actually, got let go. IO became independent because Hitman wasn't meeting expectations for Square Enix. And again, the list goes on. They stopped doing Deus Ex after Mankind Divided, right? They, Just Cause, I believe, the latest one also underperformed. The list goes on like that. And I think this was probably the inevitable case of them selling them off, because Square Enix seems to be just changing as a publisher. They seem to be more so focusing in on, hey, the MMO stuff is working great for us. The mobile stuff is working great for us. The ongoing stuff is working great for us. And Final Fantasy is working great for us. And it reminds me a little bit, and I don't want to be too, like, I don't know, extremist about it, but it reminds me a bit of Konami, when Konami started to realize that, hey, maybe putting out new Silent Hills and Castlevanias isn't necessarily the vibe. Maybe we can just continue to do pachinko machines and put out maybe Metal Gear Survive and see if that hits. Oh, it doesn't hit? Cool, let's just fall back, right? Square Enix isn't that yet, but it does seem like this is them going, hey, what works for us? It's these core things that we do, and maybe blockchain, maybe cloud stuff, we'll see. And I think you make a good point that, like, yeah, I think that is to boost the price. I think that is to boost the value for them to sell. But Square Enix is in a very fascinating place. Like, if they sell, I hope they sell to somebody good, right? Like, I think they'd be in good hands at PlayStation. I think that with the partnerships already there, it makes sense strategically. You know, you could already see how that goes with Final Fantasy and all and all that stuff. I think, again, it makes sense, but
I think the biggest thing against Square selling to PlayStation is how much money they make from the Nintendo side of things. Like, when you look at Square's output, there is so much exclusive Nintendo content that performs very well. So they would have to really keep that in mind if they were to sell to PlayStation, or PlayStation would have to figure out some type of Microsoft situation like they have with, like, Minecraft, where it's like, cool, yes, we own them, but we're going to actually still publish and develop games for the Nintendo Switch, which would be a drastic change from how PlayStation's ever done anything. But we're in unprecedented times here. Like, I wouldn't be surprised if that ends up being the case.
And somebody in chat also asked the question of, what does this mean for Perfect Dark? The initiative did tweet out this morning after this news, quote, "We're excited to see Crystal Dynamics take these next few steps with their studio. Our teams have made great progress in building Perfect Dark together as co-development partners, and we'll be continuing this work with them in their next chapter." And so they're still gonna be working on Perfect Dark. That's still ongoing. Tim, to close out this discussion, I want to bring in one more question from Glutenful from patreon.com/kindafunnygames, who writes and says, "The biggest news of the day is obviously Embracer now owning Gex. Do you think we're now guaranteed a Gex revival? And what would you want from that sexy green boy?" Tim, is this the return of Gex?
I mean, real talk, like, if Gex was, yes, it is. I'm just going to fucking say it now. We will get a Gex game from Embracer Group. Yes. When? I don't know, but it's going to happen.
Hell yeah. You heard it here first.
And it's going to have a weird ass subtitle. Like, it's going to be, I don't know, but, like, I swear to God, like every single time they reissue a game port or, like, old legacy sequel, they always have weird ass fucking things from Embracer. So,
Tim, we got more to talk about regarding acquisition, but before we get there, I want to let people out there know about patreon.com/kindafunnygames, where you can go and get the show ad free. And speaking of ads, let us tell you about our sponsors.
Shout out to ExpressVPN for sponsoring this episode. Using the internet without ExpressVPN is like walking your dog in public without securing them on a leash. Most of the time, you'll probably be fine, but what if one day your dog runs away or gets dog-napped? It's better to be careful, especially when it's as simple as using ExpressVPN. We've been using ExpressVPN here at Kinda Funny for years now. Me personally, I've been using it, and I know that my internet browsing is secure. It just gives me that peace of mind that I need. Every time you connect to an unencrypted network in cafes, hotels, airports, your online data is not secure, but ExpressVPN creates a secure encrypted tunnel between your device and the internet so they can't, and it's great. I use it on my desktop, I use it on my phone, I use it everywhere that I use the internet. It would take a hacker with a supercomputer over 1 billion years to get past ExpressVPN's encryption. You can get an extra 3 months of ExpressVPN at expressvpn.com/kindafunny. That's expressvpn.com/kindafunny, expressvpn.com/kindafunny. Shout out to Chime for sponsoring this episode. No one likes waiting on a paycheck, especially when you've got bills due. Good thing there's Chime. Now you can get your paycheck up to 2 days early with direct deposit. That's up to 2 more days to save, pay bills, and generally just feel good about your money situation. But Chime is more than just about getting paid early. It's also an award-winning mobile app, checking account, debit card, and optional savings account. So What are you waiting for? Hopefully not your paycheck. You can get started with Chime today. Applying for a free account takes less than 2 minutes. You can get started at chime.com/kfgames. That's chime.com/kfgames, chime.com/kfgames. Banking services and debit card provided by the Bancorp Bank or Stride Bank NA, members FDIC. Early access to direct deposit funds depends on payer. Shout out to Babbel for sponsoring this episode. For most of us, learning a second language in high school or college wasn't exactly a high point in our academic careers. Definitely not me. I took Spanish, didn't do well in it the first time, did okay the second time. You know what? We'll move on. Now, thanks to Babbel, the language learning app that sold more than 10 million subscriptions, there's an addictively fun and easy way to learn a new language. Whether you'll be traveling abroad, connecting in a deeper way with family, or you just have some free time, Babbel teaches bite-sized language lessons that you'll actually use in the real world. Greg Miller has been learning French little by little, and now when he goes back home to Canada to see Jen's family, he'll be able to communicate better. Isn't that a lovely situation? Babbel's 15-minute lessons make it the perfect way to learn a new language on the go. Plus, Babbel's speech recognition technology helps you to improve your pronunciation and accent. Right now, you can save up to 60% off your subscription when you go to babbel.com/kindafunny. That's BABBEL.com/kindafunny for up to 60% off your subscription. Babbel, language for life. One more time, babbel.com/kindafunny.
Tim, from chat, I have two chats here, right? Frankfurter says, Gex gonna give it to you. Gex gonna give it to you.
I like that.
And then I missed the username for this next one. It's Snug Slacks here. Says the Gex-cutioner. The
Gex-cutioner.
Gex-cutioner. Hard R rating.
Cool.
You feeling either of those for a Gex game?
I look, Bless, no matter what it's called, I'm gonna play it. But out of those two, I think I'd rather play Gex Go and Give It to You. It feels more in line with the legacy of Gex, is staying true to the fucking respect that Gex deserves. All right.
Tim, speaking of legacy, let's hop into story number 2. Warner Brothers games could soon be for sale. This is Rory Young at Game Rant. Earlier in April, the merger between Discovery and Warner Media officially closed, becoming Warner Brothers Discovery. Warner Brothers Interactive's game studios have largely been left alone through the merger period, only selling Playdemic to EA in June 2021. Now that the merger is finalized and Warner Brothers Discovery is restructuring, plans for Warner Brothers Interactive Studios appear to have changed. A report claims that Warner Brothers Discovery is already shopping its studios to interested parties, which include PlayStation and Xbox. The report comes from Fanbyte Media's Imran the Don Khan, who says that he's, quote, hearing a decent bit of chatter regarding WB Discovery's new plans. Khan explains that WB Discovery is shopping its game studios around. The list of studios at Warner Brothers Interactive currently includes Avalanche Software, Monolith Productions, NetherRealm Studios, Rocksteady Studios, as well as TT Games and WB Studios in Montreal, Boston, New York, San Diego, and San Francisco. One detail that Khan draws attention to is that WB Discovery is specifically considering selling its game studios and not its intellectual property. In other words, WB Discovery wants to sell Rocksteady and license out the Batman and Suicide Squad properties, sell Avalanche and license Harry Potter, and potentially sell NetherRealm while retaining and licensing Mortal Kombat. The following, which was tweeted by Imran the Don Khan on April 29th, quote, couldn't get enough confirmation to actually write a post about it, but hearing a decent bit of chatter this week about WB Discovery shopping their game development studios around. Interested parties include EA, Take-Two, Microsoft, Sony, Tencent, NetEase, and PUBG Corp. WBD wants to sell studios and license IP, supposedly. Tim, motherfucking Geddes, I feel like we've been talking about this for a while, right? The possible sale of WB Game Studios. Where are you at with this newest update from Imran the Don Khan, which was just a few tweets, by the way, just a couple tweets, not necessarily.
Yeah, and I think it's important even to give the context of the tweet. Was originally Imran's, like, it wasn't an article he wrote. In these tweets, he said, couldn't get enough confirmation to actually write a post about it, but I'm hearing a decent bit of chatter about blah, blah, blah. So just some context there. And even then, with what Imran's saying, it's like, yeah, I hear chatter from a whole bunch of different things. So it's like, I think that's kind of the reality of where WB and Discovery is at right now. Like, it's not just video games, it's their entire entertainment industry that they have going in every single vertical. We're seeing a lot of switch ups and change ups. I mean, in the last 2 weeks, I think there's been like multiple DC projects that were greenlit and then canceled just in the last 2 weeks. So it's like we're seeing a lot of different switch ups, change ups, like across the board. So I think that all of this is inevitable. It's just a matter of how it shakes out. I do think it's very interesting to talk about it in the context of the first story today that we talked about of Square Enix selling off the Western devs with their IP. It's a clean thing, except for the fact that the Marvel licensing isn't part of that deal because they don't own it. They're licensing it. Here, pretty much every single WB Games studio is tied to a licensed product of some sort, right? When you're talking about the Harry Potter or the DC projects that they're working on, and et cetera, et cetera.
Even Mortal
Exactly.
Kombat, right? Like that's a video game franchise, but WB still owns that.
Yeah, and so that's where it all gets complicated. Where Mortal Kombat at this point has kind of like transcended into more of like pop culture brand as opposed to just a video game. But I think that their plan to sell the teams and then license out the properties is ambitious and
it's insane.
I mean, WB, get that money. Like that's fucking
I wonder
baller.
if they do look at Disney because of like WB thinking of themselves as like the main like property competitor to Disney, and like seeing Disney not really developing in-house, but licensing Marvel and all that stuff out and stuff. I wonder if that's like, hey, let's stop spending in-house to make these things. We can just give out licenses here and there.
I also think it's them at the very start of trying to make this deal happen, where this merger finally goes through, and it's them being like, cool, what is the most profitable way we can sell off these studios? Oh, it's by keeping the IP and then licensing out the IP that these studios are known for. My question is, does this stick? Like, how long do they go about this before they realize that they can't sell, or do they actually sell? Like, does anybody actually bite the bait?
I mean, the thing is, when it comes to WB Games, in every single way, there's value. Like, I think this is different than a lot of the Square stuff we were just talking about. Like, we're talking about whether you're looking at the teams here, they're all incredibly talented teams that sell games, like all of them, and their IP that matter and sell games, all of them, right? We're talking about Harry Potter and Batman. Like, you don't get bigger than Batman, right? But then even then, like things like Mortal Kombat or The Lord of the Rings, like these are franchises that don't need to just be with the teams here, Avalanche or Monolith or whatever that are making them. It could be cool. Let's license out a Lord of the Rings game to Crystal Dynamics or to like whoever, right? And there's a lot of money to be made there and a lot of potential high quality game experiences to be had there. I think this is inevitable. I think it's also interesting to look at them potentially piecemealing this out as opposed to Square, who just got rid of all of them in one fell swoop, which I feel like is evidence to they're trying to lean out Square Enix to be able to sell to someone else the Japanese side of it. But here it's like, it seems like this is a strategic money move where I don't think it's going to be one group coming in buying all of this. I think it's going to be potentially Microsoft gobbles up NetherRealm, PlayStation takes this, Ubisoft takes that, like that type of thing. I think is a lot more likely.
I think it's just fascinating the position they're in as WB, right? Where they have NetherRealm, and I don't think you, as any other publisher, I don't think you buy NetherRealm without getting Mortal Kombat with it, right? Like you don't buy like any of these studios. You mentioned it well that like each of these studios are tied to a certain IP or a certain game that I think even like exceeds or at the very least broadens out the value of that studio in a way where it's like I'm not buying like anyone. I'm not buying Rocksteady without getting a DC property with it. I'm not gonna have them work on some random thing. Maybe you could, but it's like.
But I think you could. I
think Rocksteady, is it worth it though? Like if you can get
Rocksteady 100%, 100% that like they're gonna put something special into literally any license that they get.
Yeah, and I'm not saying that like they can't work on their own new IP or even a different kind of license, but if you can get that 2-for-1 deal of get Rocksteady and then get Suicide Squad or some Batman thing with it, I think you're making that deal.
Yeah, but that's just not going to happen because I don't think you can sell the license that way, right? And at the end of the day, they're still licensing.
They're still they're still licensing out, right? I don't think they're going to sell Batman or whatever.
Yeah, it's just like it's interesting because like I think like going through the different teams, it's like looking at NetherRealm. It's like, is NetherRealm valuable without Mortal Kombat? And I think the answer is yes, if they are also tied with another IP. But at that point, you need different licensing. But people have different licensing to be able to apply to it. Like Mortal Kombat is an X factor where the game just fucking sells extremely well. There's a the game itself is amazing, but also there's just legacy to the Mortal Kombat franchise. But like, imagine if NetherRealm came in and like, this is still licensing, but imagine if they made a Marvel fighting game.
I mean, I think at that point, then that is a fucking like wild ass. Like, yes, this brings in the value. But I think it has to be a scenario like that. Like, I can't imagine a publisher wanting to buy NetherRealm for just the talents of NetherRealm, right? Not that NetherRealm was an incredible developer, not that they couldn't make something incredible by their own merit or something that's outside of Mortal Kombat that is fantastic. But I think even us as an audience, if we see that sale go through and they go, cool, hey, we're NetherRealm and now we're making a brand new fighting game IP because we literally cannot make Mortal Kombat. I think from the audience side, we go, oh, well, shit. Like, that sucks, right? Like, that is your baby. That is Ed Boon. That is what we know you for. We want you to, when we know you want to make more Mortal Kombat, you know, why can't you make this happen? Make this deal happen, right? Like, I feel like there's such an attachment, at least for those two, right? I think for the other ones, Rocksteady even, there's an attachment to Batman, but they don't necessarily have to make Batman. But I think if you can have them make Batman, then you might as well just go for it, because I think that is where you see that highest form of value come into play.
Yeah, it's interesting where to Barrett's point earlier, it's like clearly, I mean, nothing's clear at this point with WB because everything is so murky and like in a state of flux and constant change with all the acquisitions and AT&T, and like it's been layered so much in the last decade that like where we're at now seems to be the end of the road, but like we'll fucking see. But the thing is with WB, if they are going to hold on to DC, which there's always the chance they sell DC as a whole. Like, I feel like literally any day we could wake up and it's just like DC sold to Disney and it would be like, what the fuck? But as it stands now, I think that they don't want that to be the case. And they know the value of the IP that WB as a whole owns currently. So they'd want to get rid of every team as soon as possible. Like, it's better to have no game development teams than 2 or 3. Like, get rid of all of them and then just start making that money off the licensing, because you make the money off selling the teams and then you make the money off licensing too. And at that point,
it's
you're
them having their cake and eating it too.
Exactly. And they're able to license to whoever wants to, in the same way that Marvel Disney and Marvel partnered up with Square, Crystal Dynamics, to make Avengers, or Eidos Montreal to make Guardians. Now all of a sudden they're open to sell like Mortal Kombat games. I think Mortal Kombat, because of Ed Boon and because of NetherRealm, is the least likely of the franchises.
It's like Kojima Productions and Metal Gear, right? It's like,
exactly.
You separate those, and it's like, oh, what the fuck?
But imagining any of the other games that they work on here, like someone else making a Batman game that's not Rocksteady, I can see them doing it if it's a completely different take on Batman and being successful.
100%. The thing I'd be fascinated to see would be if a publisher, like let's say an EA or a Ubisoft, came to WB and they were like, hey, we will buy all these studios outright in bulk and just have like an ongoing licensing agreement with you to make all these games, and we split it however it gets split. Like, I think there could be possibility for that, because the idea of selling all these things piecemeal is what gets like real murky and real scary and real weird. And I wonder if like there is way more ease and just go in a publisher going, hey, let's just buy all of it. You know, we'll just buy all these from you.
We're getting to a point with this acquisition season that it's untenable. These companies, no company in the world is going to be able to manage that. Like, acquiring this isn't just acquiring a name and a logo to put on a fancy press conference image, right?
Yeah,
that is. They make it seem that way. You're getting thousands of employees. You're getting like different buildings around the world where taxes are different every single place you go. There's layers of complication that start adding up, where it's like the Activision Blizzard thing going into Microsoft, that alone almost puts Microsoft in a position where it's like, we're already seeing that they can't handle it all, right?
Yeah.
And it's like, where there's going to be this like transition period of everyone trying to figure it out. Like, despite them having the money or not having the money, Microsoft can't come in and buy all 6 of these studios to add on to their studio list, because at a certain point, it's unmanageable. You can't have that many employees on payroll and make sure that everything is working the way that it needs to, on top of having to also be profitable and make money and all this shit.
Tim, I want to keep talking to you about acquisitions. Story number 3. Now, PlayStation is also hiring for an acquisitions manager. This is Chris Golian at Video Games Chronicle. Sony is seeking a director to help it make acquisitions and investments in other companies in the games industry. As spotted by business analyst Roberto Serrano, the director of corporate development listing based in Sony's California office, says the successful applicant will be mainly involved in identifying potential future acquisitions and investment targets. Quote, Sony Interactive Entertainment, PlayStation, seeks a highly qualified director of corporate development. SIE's corporate development team works closely with SIE's management team and is responsible for identifying inorganic growth opportunities through acquisitions, investments, or joint ventures, the ad reads. Quote, the team sources, evaluates, and completes transactions that are aligned with SIE's strategic priorities and drive significant long-term value for the company, end quote. The role appears to be similar to an Xbox listing posted last week, which seeks a manager in the company's gaming, strategy, and development department. Tim, acquisition season doesn't stop.
It just doesn't. No, and it's not going to. I mean, this all adds up. I think that we are probably like 3 years out from acquisition season being over.
Oh man, 3. I would even go as far as say like 5 or 6. I
It's gonna be a
we're
long
just here
season.
now. It's gonna be a long season. Tim is going to answer a door. This is fascinating to me. I think like seeing where we're at, right, with Square Enix, right? I think for sure they're on the table. For me, the question is, what else is on the table? I think this is them going, cool. We're reading the industry right now. We're seeing how much is going on. We're seeing Microsoft buy Bethesda, followed by Microsoft buying Activision Blizzard at the top of the year. I think this is kind of an inevitable thing, an inevitable shift that they're having to make, which is cool. Let's build a team. Like, let's Avengers this shit. We gotta fucking like focus in and build an actual squad that is responsible for figuring out what's on the market and how to build our studios in a viable way. Because yeah, like the competition is building.
I mean, when you look at it, there just aren't that many conglomerates left, right? Like I like to think of it in the way of showcases. During E3 season, who has a showcase? And at what point do they not have a showcase because they're just a part of someone else's showcase, right? Yeah. That is where we're currently at. So at this point, you know, like back in the day, E3 circuit meant we're getting the big 3, we're getting Nintendo, we're getting Xbox, we're getting PlayStation, but then we were also getting Ubisoft, Konami, Square. And those are kind of like the 3 third-party ones. Nowadays, that's not the case. Konami's gone, right? We get the Square, we get the Ubisoft, but then we're also getting so many other ones. Just like those,
media.
Yeah, exactly. Like these
the fandom,
and
which I know is different.
Exactly. But I mean, but the fandom, I would say totally counts. Like that is WB Games kind of presentation. And I start looking at all that, and it's like, at what point is it really just PlayStation, Microsoft? And I mean, even with Nintendo, there is always the chance of them being gobbled up at some point. I think that is, I understand, crazy to say, but it's like,
look, the final boss.
Look at the world we're in at this point, man. Yeah, it's like it is not that crazy anymore. Like this is just the era that we're in, and it's going to be a battle. I don't think it's ever going to end where it's just one group that owns everything, but I do think that it'd be silly to not imagine a world where couple years from now, it is really the big 3 meaning something completely different than it does now.
Tim, when does Konami get acquired and by who?
See, that's another big question. Like, it's interesting to look at like the legacy of a lot of these different teams and publishers and like the IP that they own. Like at this point, Konami, the value is the IP. It's not the teams.
Yeah.
Right. Like we just spent the last 20 minutes talking about WB Games and talking about how like, and even the Square stuff, like the last hour, talking about how the value is the IP and the teams.
Yeah.
Whereas Konami right now really just kind of seems like it is purely the IP. And that is not a fault of the teams there, the talent that is there. It's just the management of that talent and what they've done and the lack of output they've even had over the last couple of years without very specific things like soccer games or whatever that do well.
I mean, the soccer games now are as bad, right? Like eFootball was the latest release from Konami, which is like them shifting to free to play, and it's been a trash fire. So even that now is in a bad place.
Yeah, so it's like looking at that, I feel like it is really just counting down the days till Konami stops being bullish for whatever reasons they are. with all this stuff. Like, I feel like they are trying to hold out, and I'm not really sure why, because I'm honestly surprised PlayStation hasn't bought Konami IPs by this point. I think it will be PlayStation. I think anyone else would make it a shocker. But it could be Embracer Group.
Oh God, please no.
I do, you know, chat always reminds me of like how much Konami does outside of video games, and just like how well that side of their business like does, and that's probably why we haven't seen anything from them. Like I would see them licensing out their IP before we see IP acquisitions or any other company trying to buy them.
It's that goddamn Metal Gear pachinko machine just ruining everything.
Yeah, it really is.
Tim, we got one more news story for the Roper Report. Story number 4, Nintendo Switch Sports smashes to number 1 in the UK. This is Christopher Dring at gamesindustry.biz. Nintendo Switch Sports is comfortably number 1 in the UK box charts this week, according to the latest GfK data. It is the 3rd biggest UK launch for the franchise, behind Wii Sports and Wii Sports Resort. Those two games sold practically the same at launch as one another. Wii Sports was only available packed in with the Wii console. By comparison, Nintendo Switch Sports has sold less than half of what those games managed during the launch week. However, the latest game has performed significantly better than the previous title, Wii Sports Club, on the Wii U, which failed to reach the top 40 when it launched in a box back in 2014. It also reached number 13 in the Wii U charts. Can you imagine reaching number 13 on the Wii U charts? That's fucking wild. All historical, that's like 5 games to compete against. How do you get to number 13? All historical data is courtesy of GfK. To compare the game to other recent party games, Nintendo Switch Sports sold more than double what Mario Party Superstars managed, and almost 8 times what Just Dance 2022 achieved, both released in November 2021. It has also sold more than 6 times what Ring Fit Adventure did during its launch week back in October 2019. Week 1 sales are not a great indicator for these types of games. All of those titles named above had a quiet opening week, but have gone on to sell significant units. The audience they target are more casual and are less likely to rush out on day one. As a result, the real success of Nintendo Switch Sports will depend on how it performs over the coming months and even years. Here is the GfK UK box top 10 for the week ending April 30th. At number 10, we got Animal Crossing New Horizons. At 9, Kirby and the Forgotten Land. 8, GTA 5. 7, Elden Ring. 6, Mario Kart 8 Deluxe. At 5, Pokemon Legends Arceus. At 4, Horizon Forbidden West. At 3, Gran Turismo 7. At 2, Lego Star Wars The Skywalker Saga. And then at number 1 for the UK boxed charts, you got Nintendo Switch Sports. Impressive.
5 Nintendo Switch exclusives.
Wow. Yeah, I didn't even realize that. Holy shit.
Half the list.
It's incredible. It's incredible to see Mario Kart 8 Deluxe. I guess the DLC helps boost it up, but even regardless, I would think it'd be there anyway, right? Like, for me, it's still wild to see how well that game does.
And Animal Crossing coming in at number 10. Like, that's...
Yeah.
And on top of that, Lego Star Wars not exclusive, but 6 of these games are on the Switch.
Yeah. Insane. Tim, very curious to see how Nintendo Switch Sports does long term, but that is so far away. If I wanted what's coming out to Mom and Grop shops today, where would I look?
The official list of upcoming software across each and every platform is listed by the Kinda Funny Games Daily Show host each and every weekday.
Yeah. Out today, we got Sifu Vengeance Edition for PS5 and PS4. And then we have a deal of the day. PlayStation Now games for May have been announced. You're getting Naruto Shippuden, Ultimate Ninja Storm 4, Soul Calibur 6, and then Blasphemous. So get hyped for that. Tim, now it's time for reader mail. You can write into patreon.com/kindafunnygames where you can get your questions read on the show, just like Casey did. Casey writes in and says, why weren't the major Switch Sports reviews labeled reviews in progress? Online is clearly the default mode of the game. It's the only one that has progression and unlockables. Scoring the game without online feels irresponsible. Maybe it's on Nintendo for not having online ready for reviewers. Who dropped the ball here, reviewers or Nintendo? To start off, I did see quite a few reviews in progress for Nintendo Switch Sports. Like even some of the ones I pulled for the review roundup last week on KFGD, like I think it was GameSpot that had theirs in progress as well. So I do want to point that out. And then mine also was a review in progress. But Tim,
and wasn't IGN's as well?
I don't recall if IGN's was or not.
I think it was. I mean,
yeah.
Casey, you're wrong us if that's wrong. But yeah, I definitely saw more reviews in progress. I didn't personally see any people label it just full on review.
Yeah, like to the question of like who dropped the ball,
Nintendo.
reviewers or Nintendo. Yeah, like I mean, honestly, I think that is on Nintendo, right? Like you give somebody a review copy and you say, hey, here's the experience. This is the embargo, and we don't have online, so just review it as is, right? I think the expectation is that you're just going to review what's there, and I think it is on each outlet to decide how to service their audience, right? Like what is their audience looking for, and how do you provide the best service to them? And like for GameSpot, because I literally messaged Timur this like as we were leading into the review, because I was like, should I have online? Like, is this weird? Like, online seems like a very big part of the game. And Tomorrow's like, yeah, we're doing a review in progress. So I was like, okay, cool. I guess that makes sense. So I'll probably do that for mine too.
I mean, you hit me up and you're just like, hey, like, is online supposed to work? And I hit up our Nintendo guy and he goes, oh, we'll have more information on that later. And then later was the day it came out. It's like, that's
exactly
classic Nintendo.
Yeah. And I mean, like, look, like, that's not okay. Like, that's bad for a game like this that, like, really so much of the experience is surrounding online, especially I'm hearing like the progression and all that stuff. Like you really only progress when you're playing online.
You only progress online. And that's the thing that, I mean, I would have preferred for them not to give review copies if they're not going to have, if for this game, if they weren't going to have online, because playing online, I'll say is an entirely different experience from playing offline, right? Like offline, and this is what I talked about in my review, which again comes back to, hey, if you're giving reviewers only this portion of the game to talk about, that means that they can only talk about that portion of the game. And if that is the insignificant portion of the game, that's going to color your game a certain way, I would think. And so for me, talking about my review, right, like, on the Gamescast episode, for those who listen to it, and even on the Kinda Funny Games Daily, where we did the review roundup, I try to preface it as much as possible, where I was saying, hey, like, this is me playing offline. Like, online seems like it's a big part of the game. This is a review in progress, right? Like, I put in all those indicators to let our audience know, like, hey, this is what you should expect. But even with that, right, that leaves me just to talk about what I could talk about. And for me, what I did talk about was what was an underwhelming offline experience, because all the progression is online, right? If you want to earn gear, if you want to like level up, if you want to do rank stuff, all that stuff is online. The stuff that is offline are purely just the sports. And the sports are good, right? The sports are like range. The sports range from like okay to fun. It is the Wii Sports, right? It is that game, and it is that game without baseball and boxing, which I love baseball and boxing, so take that for what it is. But with that, like, you can only speak to what you have, and so like for me, that was what my review is based on, and what like all reviews were based on that day. But that said, right now that online is out, I would expect that you're seeing the updates. And like, I've not experienced as much online. I played for about an hour or so, and I want to go back and play more. But it seems like the online does add quite a bit. I don't know if it's going to add enough to where people are changing the review scores, but I'm down to wait and see. I did have fun,
and that's probably what
online.
Nintendo thought as well, because again, like, the reviews of this game probably weren't as important to them. Like, they probably like think about it as like a margin of like, okay, like gamers are gonna like look at scores, but how many gamers are actually gonna pick this up? We want to like really tackle the casual audience who are just gonna hear, oh, there's a new Wii Sports and it's on the Switch. Like, that's what they care about, and those people aren't gonna read reviews. Like, they don't give a shit. So yeah, I feel like for this one, especially, they were just like, yeah, whatever, we're gonna do what
I think that's 100%. And I think for things like this, like, I don't know if Nintendo does mock reviews or not. I imagine every company to some extent does mock reviews, but I imagine if they had mock reviewers, they probably saw like I imagine those mock reviewers probably gave the game probably like somewhere in a 7, like a 7 or 8, because the game is Wii Sports, and they know that their audience, if they're buying Nintendo Switch Sports, they're buying it because they want to play Wii Sports, and that is what the game is. And that's good, right? That's awesome. But I think, to your point, Barrett, like, you're absolutely right, that for them, they probably look at reviews as a very insignificant portion of this game's rollout, because it is about jumping in and having that nostalgic experience and being able to play tennis and play volleyball and all that stuff. And to that extent, like, how many of the hardcore gaming audience looks at reviews for Nintendo Switch Sports and makes that decision off of reviews? It's like, no, you know what the game is. Like, go play the game if you want to play the game.
I mean, the reality is video game companies aren't giving review copies to media outlets for ethical reasons. It's advertising to them. So like, they are getting these things in people's hands, so people are talking about them and making people aware. Now, there is that double-edged sword of, if you give people bad products, they will talk about how bad it is, and then it negatively affects you. But I bet you that if you look up Switch Sports reviews and Switch Sports coverage, there's going to be more coverage of this game from mainstream outlets than that don't normally cover video games. that like things like Cosmopolitan, you know what I mean? Like I'm just pulling that out of my ass, but like things like that, I imagine are talking about this game, and they're not talking about Final Fantasy. They're not even talking about Mario necessarily, but that is who they're putting this out to. And those reviews aren't going to be the type of in-depth reviews that are talking about the online experience. They're just going to be talking about, hey, this game's out, and that's kind of their review, you know?
Exactly. If you're watching the video version and you see me like darting my eyes to this direction, it's not because I'm rolling my eyes. It's because there is the loudest construction, which I don't think it's picking up on the mic. But on my side,
slight.
Very slight. Okay, it sounds like they are banging on my wall. It's been going on throughout the entire episode, and that has been an exercise of paying attention on this episode. Let me tell you. But hey, we're getting through it. Now it's time for kindafunny.com/you're wrong, where you write in and let us know what we got wrong as we got it wrong, so we can correct it for those watching later on youtube.com/kindafunnygames and on podcast services around the globe. That's not a you're wrong. Let's see. Starkzilla says WB doesn't own Lord of the Ring gaming rights. They're currently for sale and expected to sell to Amazon for nearly $2 billion, which is interesting. Tim, do you know anything about that? Is that a factoid? That sounds...
Well, that sounds right, because I know the Lord of the Rings rights. It's like a similar thing to James Bond, where it's like really extra weird because of the people that actually own it. So it's like they've always just been licensing out.
Gotcha. And then Nano writes in and says IGN's Nintendo Switch Sports review is not listed as a review in progress. So
I mean, but has that changed since launch day though, or since reviews have gone out?
When I pulled their review for Review Roundup, I don't think it was a in progress review then as well. Gotcha. GameSpot definitely was, and there were definitely other ones that were. But yeah, I think it's outlet per outlet. It is Monday, which means we have a full week ahead of us for Kinda Funny Games Daily. This week's hosts go like this. On Tuesday, you're getting Greg and Tim. On Wednesday, you're getting me and Janet. Thursday, you're getting Greg and Tim. Then on Friday, you're getting Greg and me. If you're watching this live on Twitch right now, after this is another edition of KFW with Greg and Snow Michael. If you want to catch that later, you can, of course, go over to youtube.com/kindafunnygames. That is youtube.com/kindafunnygames, not plays for Kinda Funny Wrestling, because we're making it a dope-ass thing. So go check it out there. Remember, this has been Kinda Funny Games Daily, each and every weekday live right here on twitch.tv/kindafunnygames. We run you through the nerdy news you need to know about. We have a Patreon post show for those that are subbed at the silver level of patreon.com/kindafunnygames. So stick around for that. Otherwise, until next time, Game Daily.